Hello and welcome back to episode 3 of the Amara podcast. I'm Lexi,
I'm Miriam.
and today we're going to be talking about the nature versus nurture debate. Now, if you've studied psychology or sociology or any other kind of social science, you would have heard of the idea of nature versus nurture. Is our personality determined by those around us, those we were brought up by, or is it something that's predetermined by DNA and genetics? We are going to find out. So, Miriam, before we start, what side would you say you fall on?
Definitely. Actually, I think I'm about 75% nurture, 25% nature.
Ooh. I would say I'm in a very similar realm to you, so I feel like this is going to be a really boring podcast. I should
It's just us agreeing. Yep, I agree.
Oh yeah. Oh my god, you're so smart. Oh my god, no, totally agree with that. So I feel like I should be team nature
Okay, I'll be team nurture then for the sake of debates.
for the sake of debating. Okay, first question. Miriam, how much do you think your upbringing affects the way that you interact with people now?
Wait, I'm nurture, right?
I don't know. You tell me, Miriam. You can say your actual opinion. We're not having a debate. I feel like we can agree.
This is the debate.
Sorry, I must win.
I think it's very heavily influenced by how we're upbrung. Is that a word? Upbrung?
Upbrought.
Upbrought.
Oh, we're upsized. I'll have a large, please. With a side order of angst.
Me with my romance books. Okay, anyway. I do believe that the people and the environment you're in as a child does affect the way you communicate with others and how you communicate with your surroundings when you're older and how you approach certain tasks. What do you think?
In my opinion, I think it is a nurturing thing. Once again, we are returning to, if you've listened to episode 2, Emily's abuse of the microphone. I keep hitting it today.
She hits on me all the time.
I'll have you know that I'm perfectly honourable. You're not my type. I don't punch below my weight.
I think you find I am everyone's type.
Miriam is just sex appeal as a person.
Honestly.
Was that a nature version?
No, that's definitely nature.
Biologically, I am superior. Okay, so the way my upbringing... I think your upbringing does affect the way you interact with others, but I think in terms of nature, it dictates whether you comply or rebel with the way that you were brought up. Because I think what makes us who we are is how we react to situations. I think choices are the things, in my opinion, that defines who we are, and situations that have taught us things. So I think if you were brought up in a very hostile environment and you decided that in terms of nurture you'd seen all of that and you actively decided to go against it, I feel like it's still nurture, but I think nature affects the way that you react to the things that are nurturing you. I think definitely culturally and like within your family, obviously, you know, my parents brought me up to be charming, debonair, you know.
I thought you were going to say Debenhams. I was like, I am Debenhams.
We're the only people that think we're funny. Everybody else is listening to this like, you think you're so smart.
But going back to the whole, you can either comply or rebel. Say two people who are both brought up in very strict households. One decides to comply with it and teach their children the same as they were taught, but one actively goes against it because they don't agree with it and decide that that's not how they want to raise their kids. And then that's where nature comes in.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting argument because that situation, very strict parents, is a situation that you see two complete opposite effects. I know loads of people with strict parents, and they are either the biggest, like, angel goody two-shoes, must follow the rules you've ever met, or they're complete rebels, simply because they have been... And it's weird, because they've been raised in the same environment, but I think you're right. I think your environment leads you down one of those two paths, but I think it's nature that dictates which one it is.
I think you're just so smart, Emily.
You agree with my opinion, therefore it's valid.
Yeah.
In terms of teenage years as well, how much do you think, like, hormones... Do you think it's hormones that make teenagers act the way they do, or do you think it's society?
I think it's a combination of both. And okay, I want to bring reading into this because I know that if I was the same person but didn't read, I would definitely be a different person.
If I was the same person then I would be a
If I was me but without the reading,
There we go.
I would definitely have a lot less knowledge, and therefore I feel like I would approach things differently.
Because you're just so smart.
Yeah, honestly. But also I feel like having knowledge makes people more understanding with a higher threshold of empathy.
Ooh.
I know.
Bringing out
Big
the
words.
E word already.
I know.
Empathy on this podcast is probably our favourite word.
It really is.
To be honest, I'm a big fan of the concept of empathy as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
See, but biologically, you think that a lot of it is nurture and the media that you choose to consume. But I've actually prepared for combating your argument.
Oh, bring it on.
Yeah.
Lay it on me.
I would like to argue you with you. And so, Miriam, you, as a person, do not view romance as a marker of success. You would agree, yes?
Romance as a marker of success, as in...
You don't base your self-worth or your self-esteem based on having a romantic relationship.
Oh, for sure.
You are very career and goal-orientated. You're very academically motivated.
If you say so.
In terms of your self-esteem, you do not place very much of it on romantic achievement.
Yes, for sure.
And so, therefore, if the nurture argument was correct, the fact that you have consumed so much romance media would mean that you were more likely to place your self-esteem on romance.
I would actually like to combat that.
Fight me!
Come on outside.
You will be decked like my mother's new porch.
Okay. Back to the argument. I think because I've ingested so much romance media,
You just ate it.
I just sucked it all.
Miriam, I love you. Nom. Miriam, oh, I love you. Nom, nom, nom. That sounds like something else, Miriam. It's not that kind of podcast.
But I think it goes with the rebel or comply with the thing that, like, you can ingest.
Just say absorb.
Absorb. I'm a sponge.
You consume. No.
They're all food related, goddammit. Anyway, I
I'm
consume.
sorry. Do you absorb your food? Do you just put your hand on it and get sucked up by a vacuum?
My skin is a vacuum.
My mouth is a vacuum. Vroom. Sorry, the intellectual argument.
Yeah. And so I think it goes with the either, comply or resist, where it's like I can consume all this romance media but still not feel inclined to have it in my personal life, whereas someone else might consume all this romance media and feel like they need it in their life.
I don't know though. I do think, in terms of biology, there is something within you that is very, like, in terms of just biology, because I think naturally the way that your brain chemistry works is very. We were also talking about. I feel like every podcast episode is us plugging our other podcast episodes. Because in episode 2, we were speaking about the idea of a creative mind versus a logical mind. And while both of us do have that duality, much more than a lot of other people we know actually, you tend to lean more towards the logical side. Mm-hmm. So I would say that there is some biological factor which makes you reach for academic success.
I also agree, because I'm just a genius.
No, Miriam, you're disagreeing with my argument and you're saying that the romance
Oh, yeah,
media is not.
I disagree, actually. Sorry, I got sidetracked with all the romance and love.
What is love?
No, but I also... No, I disagree, because...
Do you, though?
I don't, actually. No, I do disagree, because I do think nurture is a huge part, and I feel like your upbringing, for example... I was raised in a house where it was all about education and like achieving and success and not getting distracted, and romance in my eyes is a distraction, and while I consume it, I realize it, and I bathe in the relaxation that it brings me, but that's all it is. Whereas for someone else it can be a way of life.
Then technically, on the nature argument, your logical brain has the ability to compartmentalize and say romance is a leisure activity, not something that we strive for in terms of success. Would somebody with a much more free-flowing creative mind be able to separate those ideas, or would one bleed into the other? Because I think in terms of nature, that is what allows you to keep it so separate.
Well, you have won this argument, congratulations.
What do I win?
My love. But it's a distraction, so don't get distracted.
Do your work, Emily. Finish the podcast. I can't, I'm just so absorbed in my love for you, because you're my bestest friend.
Yeah, we're just friends.
I'm sorry, Miriam. I'm sorry to have to break it to you, but you're just a distraction. Right. I mean, I would say definitely in terms of being a teenager, when you have more of these hormones and these like chemicals that happen in your brain, I think you are a lot more emotional, and so I think that is a form of nature that is making you who you are, because you would not be so attracted to the idea of romance, if you get my drift, and other romance related activities.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
If you are under the age of 18, please stop. Everyone unsubscribes. But you wouldn't be so interested in procreating.
That's a gross way of putting it.
Really is. I'm trying to just say teenagers are horny. And the reason why we're horny is nature-based. So therefore, I think using romance as a marker of success could be something that you learnt while you were a teenager, because when you were a teenager, you had all the hormones and people found you very attractive, and you attached your self-esteem to that because that was the thing that you were good at. And so later on in life, something to do with nature also nurtured you. So they interlink. They interlung.
They breathe together.
And it actually, a factor of nature made you who you were because of the hormones. I think also it's worth mentioning a psychological study that we read about before this episode started that had something to do with the idea of they had the extreme thought that everything was nurture and that nature played a 0% factor in any of who you were. And
this was the Bobo doll experiment.
Oh no, that's coming up later.
Oh,
There is
sorry.
spoilers.
Oh, sorry. Keep watching. keep listening if you want to find out more about that.
Back after the break. No, we're not having a break. Stay here. Or just pause. I don't know. I don't care.
Just go read some romance.
But the idea is that they split kids up into 3 separate classes, and what they did is they complemented. So within each class there was 3 kids, and they said, you're really good at maths, wow, you're so talented, you're really good at drawing, and wow, you're really good at dance. So each kid in the class was made to feel special about one thing that they were doing, and they did that across 3 classes. They found that when they said to a child, oh, you're so good at maths, 2/3 of the time, so 2 of the 3 classes, when they asked later on in the afternoon, what would you like to do, 2 of the 3 kids picked maths because they said they were good at it. So they believed that naturally we are not better or worse at anything. Naturally, our brains are not predisposed to be creative or to be logical, but because a member of authority that we look up to told us, you are good at this thing, it made us want to do it more because we believed we were special, and therefore it nurtured us to practice it more until eventually we did get better at it. Do you agree with that study, Miriam?
I do, Emily, I do.
Really? Because I disagree with it. Oh, tension.
Well, this is awkward.
Present your argument for me.
Well,
Not that it'll be any good.
well, as well, I agree to it to an extent.
Oh,
But-
backtracking now.
No, but I also think that there are just things in life that we are naturally better at.
100%.
Yeah. And I think that we cannot be on the same level in every aspect of our life. And that just because someone has told us that they think we are good in a certain area, it doesn't mean that we go down that route.
Well, that study actually said that it did.
Well, that study is wrong.
You just said it was right. Pick a side. Pick a side, girl.
I'm confused.
It's okay, we all are. I mean, I think there's something to say about the idea of if a member of authority says you're good at something, then you become better at it. Because in terms of statistics, people who grew up in less than ideal environments were more likely, so people that grow up in single parent households statistically are more likely to be convicted of crimes. Now, I'm not saying that growing up in a single parent household is bad. I'm just saying that it is more likely to leave long lasting effects. And that's probably because they didn't have the validation from an authority figure in order to put them down sort of a path of academics or a path of creativity. So then that meant because no one was saying they were good at something, they didn't choose to pursue it. Now, that's not always the case, but I think the idea of a member of authority saying that you're good at something is definitely a key point of nurture. And I think it is one of the things that definitely make us who we are.
Yeah. Emily should just run this podcast, honestly.
I really shouldn't. Like, I would just be sitting there like, I forgot my
That's
own
me
name.
right now. Because I'm just like, Emily is just ticking all
So
the boxes.
mesmerizing.
Yeah.
No, before this podcast started, we tried to record the intro about 4 times. 3 of them, I forgot my name. A name I have had for the past 17 years.
Yeah.
Now, was my stupidity nature or nurture?
One could argue both.
Are you saying that my mum didn't raise me? No, it's nature. Actually, no, it's nurture. Mummy dropped me. I was dropped.
As a kid.
Even now.
Yeah.
Miriam just shoves me off the chair.
And now I run it.
But in terms of authority, what would you say? So we both agree with the argument that nature is very substantial in our upbringing.
Yeah.
What would you say in terms of nurture is the key component? Because I think it's members of authority, but would you say it's advertising? Would you say it's media? What would you say is the main cause of who we are?
I think who you're brought up by and in what conditions. So say you were raised by a single mum or a single dad, but you weren't necessarily working class, you were middle class. So that would differ to a person raised by a single mum or dad working class, because you might not necessarily have that person's attention, but you have money, which substitutes other things.
So you would say economic status
Yeah.
is what makes you who you are.
Yeah. You are trash. You have no money, you broke bitch.
You are worth nothing.
No, not just economical status, but I think it does play a role, because people who are brought up with less tend to, not always, but tend to value things more, I think, in terms of not even materialistically, but they tend to value time more. And they tend
See, I would say valuing time is more of a middle and upper class thing.
Really?
Because when you're working class, you value the currency, whereas when you're middle and upper class, you value the time, because time is the thing. Because currency, you have an abundance, but if you are middle or upper class, you don't have as much time.
I would disagree. I actually think that because you have such an abundance of money, it's your focus.
Ooh.
Whereas when you're working class, because you don't have as much of it, you tend to focus on things that you do, such as time with family or with friends, because you don't have the currency to buy materialistic things. So you focus more on the things that have more sentimental value.
Right, okay. See, I could see that, but then I also think that a lot of the time, as humans, this is a nature factor. We are psychologically drawn to the things that we don't have. So naturally, envy is a part of us. So in another psychological study, they actually got 5 kids and they gave one of them a treat or a reward of some kind. And then in a different group of kids, they had 5 kids and they didn't give anyone. They asked everyone to rate their feelings on a scale of 1 to 10 from the beginning and at the end. So the kids who missed out because somebody else got something actually reported feeling worse by the end than the kids who didn't have to watch somebody else get something. So I would say if you are somebody who goes without, you are naturally drawn to that thing that you see other people having.
Yeah.
And if you were here in episode 1 when we talked about the idea of we really are just plugging today. When we talked about the idea of living in relative and absolute poverty, it was the idea of seeing something that you didn't have made you want it more.
Yeah.
So maybe circumstance in terms of class would mean that you did go after money if you were working class, because that is the thing that you grew up without.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the situation, depends on the person, because it's also about nature.
We now have, I feel like we do actually need to circle back to the Bobo doll experiment in
Yes.
because we promised them. Miriam, you brought it up.
I know, I promised them, so now you have to deliver. Go on, make it good.
I'll try my best. So, in 1961, we actually have some notes here about an experiment that took place in Stanford University. And it was the idea of there were different groups, one control group, and then one aggressive and one non-aggressive group. And so what happened is there was this doll called the Bobo doll, and one group of children would have a parent, either a mother or a father, and they would play aggressively with the doll. And then a different group of children would see either a mother or a father play non-aggressively with the doll. Then they left the children in the rooms by themselves and said, you can play with whatever you want. In the third group, they just didn't play with the doll at all. And so what happened was, in the aggressive group, when they saw a mother or a father play aggressively with a doll, they played aggressively with the doll themselves. Except, I think there was one exception, where if a man was playing aggressively with a doll, then the female participants wouldn't. But in every other circumstance, if a parent played aggressively with the doll, they would play aggressively, and if they played gently, the kids would also copy that. So it was the idea of nurture, that if you saw a parental figure or a figure of authority play aggressively, you would mimic that. And I think we see that a lot in schools, because Miriam, your mum is a primary school teacher, right?
She is. And she sees it a lot, because she'll have kids that, you know, misbehave in class, or, you know, curse, or are slightly more aggressive. And she'll meet the parents and she'll be like, you know what, I'm not surprised your child has ended up like that, because I can see it in the parents. Whether the parents are the ones that are cursing around their child, or acting aggressive, or are physically, I mean, not physically harming their child, but just are much more physical in terms of punishment, or are quite verbal, and it reflects in how that child then treats children around them. And it does go back to the nurture thing, and I do think it's a very prominent influence.
So how old are the children that your mother teaches?
They are in year 6, so I think 12?
11, 12?
11, 12, yeah.
So I would say, in terms of psychology, the most substantial years when it comes to mimicking and development would definitely be 0 to 4, because that is when, you know, in terms of survival as a baby, you are learning everything you can and you are absorbing everything. So at those ages, if your parents were to do those kinds of things, you would just instinctually copy. It's the same, we do it with media, we copy all the time. We copy from, I think that links back to the idea of authority. When psychologically, when we are younger and we see something that's bigger than us and something that we aspire to be, or something that's a protecting force that could damage us, we instantly listen to it and try to mimic it. It's the idea of the circle of life and a pack mentality, that one day that authority figure is going to become old and they're not going to be able to be the leader anymore. And so you mimic them when you're younger in the hopes that you will be able to become them and take over their role.
Yeah.
So when we were talking about the Bobo doll experiment, the one group that stood out were the young females. Obviously, it's very sad that this experiment didn't include trans children, but obviously they probably wouldn't have been that many. But in terms of a biological difference, the females, when interacting with a male, didn't copy. They didn't copy an aggressive behavior pattern, and they think that that was due to nature, because they think that what happened is they didn't see the male, like the male alpha person, as somebody they could become. And so instead they didn't copy them, because that's not something they thought that they needed to learn.
Yeah.
So I think nature does affect pack mentality a lot, but I think that a lot of the time kids will copy in order to try and become what they believe is the alpha, because when boys were placed with a man or a woman who played gently, they weren't aggressive at all, because they didn't feel like they have to be. So in terms of nature, how much do you think gender affects who we are?
I think for boys, nature affects them slightly more, because I think especially with boys, it's also a pride thing. I think there's an innate pride in every boy, where it's like a competition, where it's like, I am more alpha. I mean, not for every boy, but for most of them.
I mean, it's natural.
Yeah. Whereas girls, we don't immediately look at other girls as competition. I mean, not all of us, or not as many of us.
It's less physical.
Yeah. And it's not more like who can be more feminine, whereas for guys it is who can be more man. Yeah.
Yeah, I think definitely in terms of pack mentality, women are happy to coexist more frequently.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the time, this is just, you know, assigned female at birth people they do view other girls as competition somewhat, but they don't view them as somebody who they have to be above in terms of status.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the time when it comes to... I think also there was a wonderful experiment that I saw in a documentary that was the idea of, they had all of these boys in a skate park and they were attempting to do a certain trick, and a lot of the time the guys wouldn't risk it if they thought they were going to fall off the skateboard. Whereas when they introduced two women to just walk through the room, not even interact with them, just walk through the room, they instantly started taking more risks. So I think in terms of DNA, men are more prone to risk-taking behaviours, especially when a woman is there, in order to prove their status. Whereas with women, obviously they have that sense of competition, but they don't feel the need to prove themselves within their own gender, if that makes sense. Yeah. I think that works.
That basically sums it up.
Yeah. I think this has been a short episode, I
I
think.
know.
Either that or I've just rambled.
Both. No, I'm joking. I'm not.
Okay, so have you changed your opinion?
No, I still think it's a combination of the two, and they're pretty much just important, although I do feel like nurture has a slightly bigger influence.
So what would you say biologically your mother has inherited? Like, your mother has inherited? Your mother has given to you in terms of the way you behave?
Definitely logically driven, sort of career driven.
So that's a nature thing, you think?
Yeah. I don't know. They're just so interlinked. It's like they could be both.
That's the thing. I think definitely I agree with the idea that nurture is more important, simply because in terms of nurture, you can have things that are solely nurture, whereas things with nature, it's never simply you were born that way. It's nature and nurture together.
Yeah.
I think that is where I stand.
I think that is also where I stand.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Amara podcast. I've been Lexi.
And I have been Miriam?
You're not now.
No. Now I'm just that girl.
And we will see you next week. Please
Bye.
subscribe.